Partnership. I'm Kaylin Janiga, a rising junior at the University of Notre Dame, where I'm majoring in neuroscience and behavior with a minor in poverty studies. This summer, I'm interning with the Virginia Department of Health in the State Office of Rural Health. With the help of my fellowship intern, Blake Sanchez, and the wonderful staff at the Virginia Department of Health, I'm helping to create the State Rural Health Plan, which purpose is to create policy recommendations for state leaders. My research includes a wide range of topics from maternal health to the opioid crisis and how they intersect with poverty in rural Virginians. While many of you are now familiar with the format of our keynote events, please go ahead and use the chat icon to let us know who you are, where you're logging in from, and your interest in attending tonight. Whether you're an intern, a community partner, SHECP alum, staff, or faculty from a member institution, or some other affiliation that will help us capture the audience tonight. As you're doing that, I'll go over just a couple of housekeeping tips. Both your video and your mics are turned off and will be throughout the webinar. Please feel free to submit questions via the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. SHECP staff will be monitoring that throughout the event, and we'll summarize and submit those questions to panelists when we reach the discussion part of our event. We will do our best to ensure that all questions submitted will be offered to our panelists for discussion. Tonight's event, including the chat, will be recorded for future viewing. To our interns, please be sure to take notes throughout the discussion for your cohort this week. Please feel free to continue to review the chat to learn more about our audience tonight. The chat space is a great place to link resources or offer quick reflections/affirmations of our speakers' remarks, and we encourage you to stay engaged that way throughout the presentations. However, as a reminder, if during tonight's conversation you have any questions or comments that you would like for our speakers to respond to, please submit those via the Q&A button and not the chat. Let's begin tonight's program. The Shepherd Higher Education Consortium on Poverty is an interinstitutional collaboration across 25 colleges and universities, each of whom are committed to offering classroom and engaged learning opportunities related to the study and alleviation of poverty. This summer, 84 interns are learning about poverty intervention strategies through remote partnerships with dozens of nonprofit organizations located across nearly 20 locations. Our summer programming theme, The Geography of Poverty in a Pandemic, is leading us through different perspectives about poverty's relationship to location, how our understanding of place can and should inform our strategies towards the disruption of poverty in urban, rural, and suburban spaces. Tonight's keynote features the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, one of the largest philanthropic organizations in the United States today. Founded in 1930 by Will Keith Kellogg, the Kellogg Foundation's commitment to ensuring that all children have an equal opportunity to thrive has persisted for over 90 years. This commitment is realized through three interconnected priorities: thriving children, working families, and equitable communities. Our presenters tonight, Robb Gray, Director of Policy-Advocacy and Program Officers, Vicky, Stott, and Jiha, will provide insights into their work, their partners, and the role of philanthropy within the ecosystem of poverty response. To begin our conversation, I am pleased to introduce to you Robb A. Gray, Director of Policy-Advocacy for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation in Battle Creek, Michigan. In his role, he is responsible for identifying and coordinating systemic policy changes for the foundation that helps give children every opportunity to succeed and thrive. Robb works both with his colleagues within the foundation, with partner organizations and grantees, as well as with policymakers directly to lift up and address issues contributing to poverty and systemic racism. Prior to joining the Kellogg Foundation, he worked in a variety of advocacy, campaign, and policy strategy roles in philanthropy, national nonprofit organizations, and in state and federal government. He has a bachelor's degree in political science and international relations, with a certificate in Latin American studies from the University of Florida. And he has received a Master of Public Administration with an emphasis in public policy and administrative law from the University of Oklahoma. Robb, welcome. We look forward to learning from you this evening.
Thank you so much. I'm going to try and do what might be impossible, which is to share my screen. So give me 1 second. All right. And okay, I think we have success. Maybe. All right. Okay, perfect. So I hope you can see my screen. It's just so great to be with you this afternoon. And I really want to applaud all of you for your involvement in the SHECP program. It's all of our responsibility to learn more and do more. And you're an example for other students and for all of us. And certainly in this moment, it's such an extraordinary moment. The policies that have perpetuated poverty and inequity and inequality have taken their human toll. And we're seeing that vividly through what's happening through COVID-19. And so we have a big job ahead of us. And so really grateful for your time and your attention throughout this semester and this evening. So as Kaylin said, my name is Robb Gray, and I'm the Policy Advocacy Director for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the philanthropic sector, how our philanthropy engages in this issue. And then I'm going to introduce a few of my colleagues to discuss how their particular issues come into play as well. So to give us a start, I think it's important to really just talk about what philanthropy is. Philanthropy has a big role to play in poverty and inequality, but what is the philanthropic sector? The heart of philanthropy is to use resources to promote the well-being of people, to help people in causes that impact people. And that can take many forms. The heart of what we do is really, it's about the public sector, it's about the general welfare, and that's different than a lot of other kinds of philanthropy, such as corporate philanthropy, which is to help a specific corporation or specific interest that's out there. We are about the general welfare. And so while we are also considered a charity really, and philanthropy overlap. Charity is really more about trying to help in a specific moment. It's more about trying to help alleviate a certain problem. Whereas philanthropy is really focused on the public space for looking at systemic changes, like how do we solve the root causes of problems? So it's a little bit of a different nuance. It's important to make that distinction. Philanthropies are required to give at least 5% of all of their assets. So that means when the economy does well, their giving grows, but it also means that when the economy goes down, like it is now, funding decreases. That's not uniform because a lot of foundations like the W.K. Kellogg Foundation actually find it to be our social mission to increase giving when things are actually at their worst. And that's exactly what we've done. And we're really excited to be partnering with a number of other foundations to actually increase our payout and our giving $1.7 billion over the next 3 years in response to the pandemic. So hoping again to leverage this moment. So in terms of how much money philanthropy spends, it's about $75 billion. Now, $75 billion sounds like a lot of money, but to give you some perspective, the US economy is about $21.4 trillion. So philanthropy is less than 1% of the total economy. And as as our philanthropy, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation is just, while we might be one of the largest philanthropies in the country, we're still a fraction of that 1%. So what does that mean? It really means that our grant making to over 1,300 organizations around the country and in specific places that we'll talk about here in a moment, it means that we have to be very focused. It means we have to be very strategic in order to make an impact. So as Kaylin really well outlined, our foundation was founded by serial pioneer and businessman William Keith Kellogg. In addition to giving us cornflakes and Fruit Loops, he created the foundation with really a simple mission. The mission is focus on helping children and invest in communities to ensure that they have the tools to help themselves. He knew that making enduring change meant it's about empowering communities and thinking long-term. And so 90 years later, where we are today, children continue to be at the heart of everything we do at the foundation. And our goal is really lasting transformational change for all children. In our work over the years, we've learned a lot, and we've learned that children are likely to thrive when they have a healthy start and when they have quality learning experiences, and their families are economically secure, and they live in vibrant, equitable communities. So as our foundation moves through its work, we work to maximize our resources and to do everything we can to make an impact. We use a variety of tools to do that and to improve children's lives. And that includes grant making, it includes impact investing, it means convening groups, it means public policy and advocacy engagement. So in terms of where we fund, we believe in the power of place. We make larger national grants to organizations that work across the country and across the world that have broad impacts, but strategically, we know that we can make a bigger commitment, and we actually have we've made very specific commitments to places in order to help a generation. And so those specific places include Michigan, in particular, Battle Creek, where we're founded, Cereal Town, Grand Rapids, and Detroit. In Mississippi, where I am right now, we're at Mississippi Delta, the Gulf Coast, in Jackson. In New Orleans, a city that was devastated by Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and took the lives of almost 2,000 people, we're very committed to the reconstruction and rebuilding of New Orleans. New Mexico, which serves a large Latinx community, as well as the Navajo Nation. Mexico, which indigenous populations in Chiapas and Yucatan, and then Haiti in the rural areas of central and southwest regions in that country. So this concentration allows us to really invest in local leaders. It allows us to build infrastructure, and it allows us to really have a stake in a community and be a partner in that community. So unlike a lot of other philanthropies, we want to focus resources and think long-term, just like Mr. Kellogg and his vision. So as Kaylin also mentioned, some of the program areas that we're most engaged in are education, economic security, and health equity. And so in education, that includes everything from early childhood education, schools, learning. Economic security includes things like helping families find access to good jobs, helping them get capital so that they have the resources that they can borrow and save. We also do a lot of work in health, which includes maternal and child health access and affordability, as well as access to nutrition, which are also important in a child's life. So central to everything we do is addressing racial inequality. We know that people of color, immigrants, Native Americans, people in jails and prisons, and the poor bear the brunt of systemic racism. And we strongly believe that if we want to improve the outcomes for children everywhere, we need to focus on the problem, which we strongly believe and know is systemic racism. So racial equity is in our DNA. So finally, I want to talk about policy advocacy. It's important to our work because public policy impacts every aspect of a child's life. When rooted in equity and evidence-based research, public policy can be a vehicle to construct lasting change. And it really can provide the economic stability in the future for a full civic participation of communities where children and family can grow, they can develop, and they can contribute. And the primary way that our foundation supports policy engagement is at the community level, as I mentioned. We find that when communities have a hand in creating, negotiating, and implementing solutions, the policies are more relevant. They're more likely to be embraced and ultimately more sustainable. So it makes us different than other groups that will just kind of come into a state, try and change a law, and then go somewhere else. We believe that community has to embrace that policy and has to be at the core, and it has to be their solution. So in addition to lifting up community voices, we also leverage strategic partnerships with other foundations and other groups. It also means finding unlikely allies, people that you wouldn't expect us to work with, but we try and find those common bonds. Again, it's about those partnerships that help us move an issue. And we also use our voice as the foundation to educate lawmakers directly at the state, local, national, and international levels. And there's so many ways to engage in policy. It can be through leadership development building campaigns. It can be helping a state or international agency or national agency partnering with them. It can be about policy research and analysis, because we all need good data and evidence in order to make good decisions. And it also is about making sure people have the tools and the ability to engage policymakers directly, whether that's voting or informing policymakers about the issues. So I'm going to stop there because I am so excited to be able to have two of my colleagues with me today that are going to be presenting a little bit more of what they do, and they are rock stars. Vicky, Stott, and Ryan Jiha are part of the foundation and work in different areas of the foundation. So first, we're going to hear from Vicky about how philanthropy is addressing poverty and inequality in Indian country, and then we're going to hear from Ryan, who works with our team in Haiti. So just to give you a little background on Vicky, Vicky's from Colorado, but she now lives in Michigan, and she's a citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. She's a program officer at the foundation and serves on the foundation's racial equity, community engagement, and leadership team. Vicky comes to the foundation with a lot of experience creating systemic change, both working overseas and also with sovereign tribal governments in this country. She has a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Colorado in Boulder and a professional certificate in community development from Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And we're going to hear from her first, and then we're going to hear from Ryan. Ryan was born and raised in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, but right now is sheltering in place and hunkered down mostly against his will in Miami, Florida. Ryan is a program officer working with our international team focused on healthcare issues in Haiti. Ryan has a significant amount of experience working with international relief organizations. He has coordinated and administered the healthcare delivery systems of such issues such as HIV and AIDS, tuberculosis, water sanitation, as well as maternal and child health protection and nutrition. He has a bachelor's degree in applied economics with a minor in global public health from the University of Virginia, and a master's of health administration from Tulane. But first, I'm so excited to have Vicky join us and to share a little bit more about the work she does. So thank you for joining us, Vicky. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rob. I feel incredibly honored to be here with you this evening. And thank you so much for inviting us to be in this space with you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Great, just going to set this up. Just wanted to, again, thank you so much for the invitation, just to be able to share a bit of information tonight about Native nations, our history in the Americas, and also just current context today and who we are as a people. And as I think through my own experience, a lot of what I'll share tonight is both a personal context, but also connected to the work that we do at the WK Kellogg Foundation. So I just wanted to spend just a few minutes sharing some highlights around a bit of the history and the context of Native people, and more specifically Indigenous people across the Americas, where oftentimes anytime that we're talked about, it's in reference to 1492, when Christopher Columbus supposedly discovered the Americas. So where I always like to begin is just the space of helping people to understand that before 1492, there were millions of Indigenous peoples on this continent living and thriving and taking care of the earth and taking care of our nations and our families and our communities. And so when the onslaught of 1492 began, it completely disrupted our world and changed the way that our governance was set up, and also our communities, our languages, and our ways of being and our cultures. And so the image that you see here it's quite a famous image reflecting Christopher Columbus and the supposed discovery of the Americas. And so in that space, I want to talk just a little bit about sort of the legacy of colonization, more specifically here in the United States, and what took place in terms of the doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls and the impact, on Indigenous communities and Native nations here in the US, where in the early 1400s, with the impact of the English colonizers, or in some ways that some people describe as English settlers, where the impact of the papal bulls. So many people actually don't know this. It's often a history that's never taught in the school systems, where the papal bulls, or the doctrine of discovery, was the advent of what we know of today, of legal principles that allowed European countries to colonize not only themselves, but also to colonize on a global scale. And so the papal bulls, primarily put forward by Pope Nicholas V, who essentially put forward three sort of key papal bulls that really dictated and set the groundwork for systems of colonization, starting in European countries, and then it spread out across the globe over time. And so those papal bulls really in many ways set the stage for the legal and the religious and the economic framework that allowed for the colonization of different nations on a global scale. And so that legal framework, not only did it set the stage for colonization and the disruption of Indigenous communities and Indigenous peoples, it also set the stage for white supremacy and Western domination, and the Western domination of systems, also in terms of narratives and how history is taught and how history is told. And I also just wanted to speak just a little bit about the impact of the doctrine of discovery, the papal bulls, and colonization over time. I wanted to share this map with you because it's really instrumental in terms of understanding what it has been like for indigenous communities in the United States specifically, with a disruption of our food and economic systems. So from 1492 to the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were vast, very traditional cultural systems that were set up in this country that were specifically dedicated to ensuring the safety nets and the cultural continuity of indigenous peoples. And so there were economic systems that worked for hundreds of years that allowed our people to survive, to thrive, to be successful, to be able to take care of our communities, but also being able to take care of and stewarding the earth in a way where lands and our sovereignty as a people was being protected. And I also just wanted to share some highlights, just to talk specifically about the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 8 of the US Constitution, this is where tribal sovereignty was actually codified into law in the United States. This was to ensure the protection of tribal nations. It was to ensure our right to our traditional and tribal homelands. And it was also instituted to a place where we could protect our commerce. And so our commerce in the sense of protecting our tribal economies. So many people don't actually know that our tribal economies are protected in the US Constitution, and they are codified into federal law. And I also just wanted to mention with in late 1800s, around 1887, the US government put forward the Dawes Act. And so in the Dawes Act, this allowed for the US government to continue stealing land from indigenous people. So this was the forced removal of Native nations from our traditional homelands. This was another form of a colonized policy, which enabled, in many ways, the US government not only to take land, but also to continue a legacy of not only just colonization, but also a form of genocide, because it took away our traditional homelands. It took away our ability to be able to feed ourselves and live off of the land. It also significantly disrupted our economies and ways of life. And I wanted to talk a little bit also just to personalize this and share a bit about my own story. So as Rob mentioned earlier, I'm from the Ho-Chunk Nation of Wisconsin. And right around the late 1800s, there were thousands of us, my own ancestors that remained in the North American continent. And with the onslaught of genocide, with colonial policies and colonial systems, where I'm from, so many of my ancestors didn't survive. Late 1800s, there were about 500 of people that remained in the United States. And so the late 1800s, early 1900s we were significantly impacted by pandemics, by health pandemics across the United States. And one of those pandemics was smallpox. And in that space, just died during the smallpox pandemic. Many children were lost around that time. And so many of my ancestors, the ones that remained, and the image that you see is, those are my green deer relatives. Those were the children that survived. And they were the ones that were able to help carry my people forward in a way. But because of that smallpox epidemic, there were about 500 or so of us that remained after that pandemic really decimated my people in particular. And I also just wanted to highlight a bit about the impact of Indian boarding schools. Again, this is another part of history that we don't often hear about. We don't often talk about these issues, where many of my own ancestors were stolen. We call them the stolen generation. So many of them were taken from my own family and forced to attend Indian boarding schools. They were not allowed to speak our language. They were not allowed to practice our cultural ways. They were not allowed to practice our own spirituality and sense of being. And in this space, many of my own relatives also passed away at very young ages during this particular time period. And so with the remaining time that I have, I just wanted to share some really key highlights about tribal health and also tribal economies today. Again, you know, many people don't know just because of the dominant Western narrative about Native history, about Native tribes. And so today there are more than 500 different sovereign nations across the United States. Many of those tribes are federally recognized. Many of them are state recognized, and there's different levels of tribal sovereignty that exist across the country. And within those tribal nations, every single one of those tribes has a treaty with the United States. They have a tribal constitution, and we have our own laws and policies and tribal governance structures that continue to exist today. And many people actually don't know that for people that are from tribal nations here in the US, that we're in a sense dual citizens. We come from two nations. We come from our tribal nation, and then we come from the United States. And that's how in many ways we identify ourselves. And I just wanted to highlight too the importance of understanding more about the legal structure of tribes and our own sense of tribal governance and how it connects to tribal economies. So before the late 1800s, every single tribe had a form of its own governance system. It had its own way of being a sovereign nation or a nation within a nation. And every single tribe had codified laws that protected our communities, it protected our people, it protected our families, and in many ways it protected future generations in the sense of just ensuring that future generations would have an earth to live upon, where they could continue to thrive and move forward as a people. And so within that governance structure, there are not only judicial and legal systems, but there are also very strong economic systems and economic structures that are established to help tribes to continue to grow and thrive. And so many people also don't know that even though our tribal governance structures are codified into federal law, they're codified in our US Constitution, every single tribe has had to fend for themselves in many ways in terms of building and restructuring their entire tribal economies because of the impact of genocide and colonization over time. And it's also important to note the impact of genocide and colonization. When the pandemics hit Native nations, more specifically towards the late 1800s, early 1900s, it really decimated so many of our communities and our families and children. And that legacy through today has impacted us in such a way that Native people have some of the highest death rates, have some of the worst health indicators across the country. Many of our communities are impacted by various autoimmune diseases, a number of different health issues that are pervasive across our nations. You know, much of this is, again, because of the significant disruption of genocide and colonization, the disruption to our food systems, the disruption to our economies and ways of being. Even just being able to access healthy foods is a significant challenge. And so even though our right to health is guaranteed and codified into federal law and in the US Constitution, this fulfillment by the US federal government has never happened. And literally, it wasn't until the COVID-19 pandemic came about where the US government finally started to reach its commitment in terms of guaranteeing resources to help with the health disparities that exist across Indian country. And I also just wanted to share very quickly in terms of thinking through the COVID-19 pandemic and what's taking place today. So some of the latest data
Hi, everybody. This is Stephanie. Vicky is trying to get back in. So if we could borrow your patience for just a few seconds while she reconnects, then we should get going shortly.
So I think Vicky is back. If you want to cut back to her. Okay. Let's see if I can share my screen. Okay. Yeah, I'm really sorry, Vicky, but I'll just go right ahead. And thank you so much to Vicky and Rob for your presentations, as they really segue nicely into what I'm going to talk about, which is the Foundation's equity approach to pandemic preparedness and response, as well as the challenges and opportunities for Haiti. So as Rob mentioned earlier, my name is Ryan Jiha, and I'm the program officer leading the health equity work at the Kellogg Foundation for Haiti, and I'm also Haitian. I was born and raised there. So while the focus will be on Haiti for most of this presentation, I would like to point out that our equity approach at the Kellogg Foundation and the challenges that will be laid out in these presentations also apply to other low middle income countries and low resource settings like Haiti, where we also work and invest, including Indian country in the US that Vicky just presented, Mexico, Brazil, South Africa. These communities are also vulnerable in responding to this crisis, to the COVID-19 crisis, because of what they all share in common, which is the colonial, racialized, unequal, and systemic issues that have plagued them for centuries. So I'm sure you guys have probably heard about Haiti, and in learning about Haiti, you've often heard it referred to as a failed state or the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And I personally don't like hearing these terms when describing Haiti. And one of the reasons why not is because it really obscures the highest reasons for why Haiti is where it is today. You see, the statistics on Haiti that you see on your screen do not provide a full understanding of why these numbers are the lowest in the Western Hemisphere. Not because they are wrong, but because history is often silenced, and so are the historical facts of the legacy of slavery and colonialism. The decades of neoliberal economic policies, the natural disasters, including one of the worst earthquakes ever recorded in modern history, which have all attributed to getting Haiti where it is today. Yet, these alarming statistics paint a very grim picture for any child born today in Haiti to have the chances of being productive as an adult. Let's look at the statistics. So 63, some of the lowest life expectancy in the Western Hemisphere. About 60% of Haitians live in poverty, about 25% in extreme poverty. And the healthcare sort of measures here are, abysmal. You have 20 physicians per 10,000, urban centers in the US, it's 10x that. The critical care capacity with the ICU beds, 10 ICU beds per 11 million people. That's scary. The critical care, lack of critical care, especially right now in the times of COVID-19, right? The highest maternal mortality rate in the Western Hemisphere, 420 per 100,000 people. And then just to give you a sense of the scale and magnitude of the inequity, this is the annual budget for health in Haiti for 2018-2019, last year. And just one foundation in the US, the Kellogg Foundation, in the same year had $450 million in payout. So that just shows you the magnitude of the inequity here. And then per capita spending on health in Haiti is $13. In the US, $11,172. So let's take a quick look at exactly why Haiti got to where it is and how it got there. So some of you too may be familiar with what we call the transatlantic slave trade, also known as the triangle trade, because it is based on 3 distinct stages, right? So it's taking manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, mostly cloth, spirit, tobacco, metal goods, And these goods are then exchanged for African slaves. The second stage of the triangle trade is called the Middle Passage, and it involves shipping now the slaves to the Americas, also known as the New World. The third and final stage involved the return to Europe with the products from the slave labor plantations in the form of cotton, sugar, coffee, tobacco, rum. And for all, the second diaporama here shows, for almost a century, the French colony of Saint-Domingue was the single most lucrative colony in the world. So just a quick historical timeline of the Haitian Revolution. 1697, the Treaty of Ryswick formally recognizes French control of the western third of the island of Hispaniola from Spain. Haiti is the French colony with the name Saint-Domingue. By the second half of the 18th century, it was the most wealth-producing colony in the world, exporting sugar, coffee, and indigo to France. Saint-Domingue was responsible for half of the sugar and 2/3 of the coffee produced in the world. Enslaved men, children, women and children produced this wealth under an incredibly violent system of slavery, regulated and legitimized under Louis XIV's Code Noir. The average life of a slave was about 5 to 6 years. The death rate among the enslaved was so high that the French constantly imported new captives to work the plantations. It was cheaper to work the slave to death and import the new slaves from Africa in order to make a profit than it was to give them some sort of a form of decent life to extend their life expectancy. At any one time, about 2/3 of the enslaved population had been born in Africa. 1791, enslaved people in the northern sugar plains of Saint-Domingue, known today as Cap-Haïtien, rose in a coordinated rebellion to destroy French slavery. They started the 13-year bloody and violent event that's come to be known as the Haitian Revolution. 1803, Napoleon sells Louisiana to the United States for 15 million francs as it fails to put down the slave revolt in Saint-Domingue. 1804, Dessalines, a revolutionary hero, declares independence and renames the new nation Haiti. The name Haiti, or Haiti, comes from the indigenous Taino language, which was the native name given to the entire island of Hispaniola to mean land of high mountains. It is a symbolic gesture to recognize that this land did not belong to the free slaves, most of which had not even been born there, but to the native Indians who had been massacred and exterminated by the Spanish upon the discovery of the New World in 1492 by Christopher Columbus. From the first day of its existence, Haiti banned slavery. It was the first country to do so. By abolishing slavery in its entirety, Haiti also abolished the slave trade, unlike the two-step approach of the European nations. For example, the British abolished the slave trade in 1807, but only passed the Abolition Act in 1833 and continued enslaving people in the Caribbean until 1838. Haitians, by contrast, forced one of the most powerful European empires in the 18th century to abolish slavery, for which the colonial powers made sure they paid very dearly for. Almost as soon as Haiti declared its independence, all slave-owning countries, including the United States, refused to trade with the first Black independent nation in the history of the world. Haiti was immediately isolated until 1825, when France decided that it would recognize Haitian independence, but only at the price of 150 million francs, or 10 times the amount that the US had paid for Louisiana territory. That sum was meant to compensate the French colonists from their lost revenues from slavery. Rejection of that ordinance almost certainly meant war. And in fact, Haitians ended up paying more than twice the value of those claims and did not pay off it completely until 1947, almost 122 years later, which now the economists have estimated to be about $28 billion in present day money. So this was not diplomacy, it was extortion. The Haitian people suffered the brunt of the consequences of French theft. Researchers have found that the independence debt and the resulting drain on the Haitian treasury were directly responsible not only for the underfunding of education in 28th century Haiti, but also for the lack of healthcare and the country's inability to develop its public infrastructure. That same healthcare infrastructure that would have been vital today to be able to deal with this pandemic. In the interest of time, I will skip over other pivotal events, but then on January 12th, 2010, this happened. This is the deadliest earthquake recorded in modern history. While the final death toll will never be known, 300,000 people are likely estimated to have died. And this is likely an estimate because the event happened so fast, in 35 seconds, that many people had to be buried before they could be counted. It also left 1.5 million people homeless. Shortly after the quake, Haiti became known as the Republic of NGOs. At one point, Haiti had the second highest number of NGOs per capita in the world, with more than 10,000 NGOs, meaning there were lots of uncoordinated and duplicative efforts by external actors who devised their own short-term plan of what Haiti needed. 10 years later, funders and implementers failed to build the strong and resilient institutions in the country and bypassed almost all levels of the Haitian government. It was found that less than 1% of the total funds pledged to Haiti during the earthquake actually went to government institutions or local grassroots organizations. The majority just went back to donor countries in the form of salaries and administrative costs to pay for consultants and so-called experts. If that wasn't enough, UN peacekeepers deployed from Nepal introduced cholera in Haiti, a country where only 55% of the population has access to adequate water and sanitation services. It was a perfect storm. Over 10,000 people were killed and over 800,000 were sickened with the bacterium, which has now become one of the deadliest modern outbreaks of cholera in the world. So if there's ever a silver lining to this crisis, to these disasters in the earthquake of Haiti, it has been the re-engagement of the Kellogg Foundation in Haiti, building upon its history in Latin America and the Caribbean since 1942. The earthquake provided an opportunity for the Kellogg board to recommit to Latin America and the Caribbean, especially Haiti and Mexico, for at least a generation, and using the lessons learned to make our efforts more strategic. So one of the few things that make us very different from other funders engaging in Haiti are we're Haitian staff with an integrated strategic body of work based on visioning processes created by the communities. Also, how we enter communities and show up. We're a real partner to these communities, and we value bottom-up development and local ownership. We also are interested in long-term impact and systems change as opposed to short-term indicators. We emphasize the fact that, as Rob mentioned, children as the catalyst for change in communities. Also, we're interested in place-based strategies for local development. And all of that is infused by our DNA. It's something we're very proud of as a foundation. And it includes racial equity, community engagement, and leadership. Because we know that for any anti-poverty tool to be successful, the structural, cultural, and social norms fueling inequality, whether by race or sex, must first be challenged. So at Kellogg, we believe that people have the inherent capacity to solve their problems. Therefore, meaningful and enduring change must be driven by communities and native nations, in particular by those directly impacted by systemic racism, inequality, and oppression. So where are we investing right now in Haiti? And Rob quickly mentioned this. It's 12 communities spanning central and southwest corridor regions of Haiti. And as you can see, our investments in Haiti have steadily risen over time. With the average being around 15 to 20 million a year in grant funding, which makes the Kellogg Foundation today the largest private donor in Haiti. What's our strategy like? So we use an integrated strategy spanning across 3 main programmatic areas or bodies of work. Health equity, mainly around maternal and child health. Because again, Haiti has the highest mortality rate for infant children and pregnant women in the Western Hemisphere. Employment equity or family economic security, because of the impact of poverty and income generation on health and education outcomes, but also food insecurity. Early childhood education, because 60% of children that start primary school in Haiti, a largely private enterprise, drop out by the time they reach high school. Less than 1% actually make it to university. Our main bodies of work are focused on where we can have the most impact. Understanding what's working so that we can continue to invest in models that can be scaled, replicated, and leveraged with other funders. So what we call the pockets of hope. So because we also believe that all people have the inherent capacity to affect changes in their lives, in their organizations, and in their communities, we use the following investment philosophy in our grant making in Haiti. Investment, not aid. Development, not relief. Long-term approach, not short-term results. Intersectorial, we collaborate for maximum impact. We partner with community leadership so that they can have a stake in the projects we fund. Capacity building of local organizations is something we're very interested in. This is just a quick diaporama of basically the cascade of our grant-making strategy. So we start with investing in people, and then we encourage collaboration and alliances for maximum impact. And then hopefully they take the shape of movements, then policies that will ultimately outlast the foundation in the communities. And at each stage of this cascade, our DNA, and we use their DNA is infused, and we use an equity lens. And then comes COVID-19, which is just another health crisis for low and middle income countries and low resource settings to deal with. This is a snapshot of the Johns Hopkins, which I'm sure you guys are very familiar with, of the COVID tracker as of 7/14/2020, yesterday, showing the US as the global epicenter and Brazil as the epicenter for Latin America. Mexico and South Africa are closely behind. So for low and middle income countries, this is only showing the tip of the iceberg because not enough testing is being done to get us a good sense of what is happening with the pandemic. For example, in Haiti, these figures are severely underestimated as testing capacity in the country is still very limited. Haitian health authorities have only tested around 10,000 suspected cases of COVID-19, whereas in the Dominican Republic, which has a population roughly equal to Haiti's, 112,000 tests have been performed. So what are the typical challenges facing low resource settings, whether they're in Latin America and the Caribbean, or even within the United States? And I would say these challenges are not unique to Haiti, which is why I wanted to bring them up, because they exist as well in the Indian country, as Vicky quickly touched on. So let's take a look at those. Limited testing capacity, right? It's not that these countries do not want to test. They don't have the people, the supplies, and the labs to test. And even when the labs exist, they're over-concentrated in urban areas. So for example, in Haiti, the only 2 labs that are able to do the test are in the capital city of Port-au-Prince. So centralized testing means that it's more complicated for rural areas to have access to these tests. Social distancing is nearly impossible for many around the world, as we know, and because a lot of people live in 1 or 2 rooms, and multi-general housing is commonplace in many settings, such as Indian country. But we do know that the challenge of social distancing does not stop with home living conditions. People also cannot distance themselves if they need to find food that day, if they have to worry about what they are going to eat that day, if they are also living paycheck to paycheck. So for example, many Haitians live day to day and earn their livelihoods through the informal sector to survive and simply cannot stay home. Water and sanitation. 3 billion people around the world do not have access to the type of water and sanitation they need to be able to just wash their hands. Clinical and overburdened health system. The capacity to deliver care in post-colonial countries is closely correlated with slavery and colonization. And the strain on the health system also affects the resources allocated to focus on the epidemic. So because healthcare does not stop, pressure on strained health systems actually leads to more death, not directly related to the outbreak or the epidemic. Data from West Africa during Ebola outbreak has shown that more people died from the health complications than they did of Ebola itself. High-risk comorbidities. We see a higher prevalence of comorbid conditions in communities of color, whether it's diabetes, heart failure, asthma, hypertension. All these things contribute to poor outcomes in the disease like COVID-19. And there are also economic complications of shutting down borders and food insecurity issues. So what role can philanthropy really play, right? Because this is an unprecedented crisis in scale and impact, and every community around the world is impacted. And I believe, and I know Rob just mentioned this, philanthropies have a unique advantage. They have the ability to work flexibly to rise to the challenge, but they can also work in partnership, in collaboration with local governments, national governments, private organizations, and civil society. There is also a constant tension between how much you focus on the short term, urgent relief, and support the long term that allows us to be able to get out of this crisis. So the Kellogg Foundation, specifically in Haiti, we invested in the short term. We drew lessons from cholera and Ebola to set up temporary COVID-19 units in our communities, right? To support the staff, the stuff, the space, and the systems that are necessary to deal with the crisis. And again, because health did not stop, we also allowed we were flexible with grant making and changing the internal system, our internal system, to be allowed to move quickly with funding. But we're moving to the next year, several years thereafter, and the near and the long-term strategy of the crisis is to put equity at the center stage of our grant making. We believe that an equity approach can contain the pandemic because diseases like COVID-19 perpetuate inequities and disproportionately impact the poor and most vulnerable. We're considering the bold, big, best investments in the kind of health systems that are flexible enough to prepare the communities for the next pandemic. Because we believe that equity underpins the basic building blocks for pandemic preparedness, namely equitable and comprehensive systems of prevention, care, and treatment that are affordable to all. So just quickly here, and I'm sorry I'm running over time, conclusion and few takeaways. So taking history as a guide, COVID-19 is just following a long legacy of past pandemics. Whether the cause of the illness is due to cholera, chikungunya, Zika, Ebola, history has always demonstrated that disease disproportionately affects the poor and marginalized population, and COVID-19 is no different. It's not the great pandemic that is an equalizer. All over the world, the coronavirus has exposed and exacerbated class and racial inequities that existed even before the pandemic. These social inequities and deep divides, whether they're global or within nations, perpetuated by COVID-19 are leading to vulnerable communities paying the high price, both in terms of risk and outcome of the disease. So just if you take one thing away from this presentation, it is that poverty itself is shaping this pandemic. Differences in risk, severity, and outcome of disasters, whether they're man-made or natural, are always linked to the social determinants of health and the realization of basic human rights. Poverty is a complex phenomenon, often with deep roots in history. So I challenge you to step outside of your comfort zone and look beyond the statistics and what the news are actually showing you. Just as one would not be able to explain why communities of color are lagging behind in every measure of well-being in the US without actually touching on the racial wealth gap, stolen native lands, decades of Jim Crow, redlining, etc., so too can history, anthropology, and social sciences explain why countries like Haiti have a vulnerability in responding to disasters. As the global protests continue around the world to support the Black Lives Matter movement, which I know young people like you are leading, to systematically expose the legacies of slavery, colonialism today, we must remember where this all started. Perhaps you too will see that Haiti should not be characterized as the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, but the first nation to embrace a comprehensive, equity-based approach by permanently banning slavery and the slave trade from the first day of its existence. And that is the same kind of equity-based approach that is currently needed to respond effectively to COVID-19 and to prepare low and middle income countries, as well as under-resourced communities for this pandemic and others to come. Thank you, and with that, I will just pass it along to Abigail, and I look forward to the questions.
Thanks to you all for such an informative discussion this evening. I know our audience is anxious to join the conversation. I'm Abigail Abakoye, a rising junior at the University of Notre Dame, where I'm majoring in biological sciences with minors in anthropology and poverty studies. This summer, I'm interning with the Shepherd's Clinic in Baltimore, Maryland. The clinic provides free comprehensive health care to those who cannot afford commercial insurance, yet do not qualify for government assistance. Since 1991, the clinic has provided services to patients living in 9 zip codes in North Baltimore, including medical care, behavioral health programming, and wellness services. But now let's hear from some more from our presenters about their work. As a reminder, you can submit your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a question for anyone in particular, please identify them in your question. The first question I have is for all of you. What is your favorite part of working in your position, and what is the most difficult part of the nature of your work?
Sometimes the most difficult nature of the work is when internet does not work, or sometimes the presentations go down. I know Vicky is back with us, and if it's okay, maybe just to give Vicky just a second to share any thoughts as she was wrapping up, if that makes sense, or if that's okay.
Absolutely. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Oh, amazing. I love it when that happens. My sincere apologies. I completely lost the internet connection. So I just had to call in. But that's a fantastic question because it helps me to come back to the closing that I was going to share with all of you. I think one of the amazing things that I love about working at the Kellogg Foundation is that we get to make a number of really important investments into communities of color. And so specifically, when I think about Native nations in the US, where how important it is for us to be able to make those investments during a time, especially right now, with this triple pandemic of COVID-19, the racialized violence, and also just the economic inequities that exist and that are compounded because of the pandemic. So being so closely connected with amazing colleagues like Robb and Ryan, where we're able to strategize together to really look at investments and where we can make really important grants to communities that so very much need our support during this time. And part of that investment work, specifically in the area where I am, is the support to Indian country in terms of grants related to policy and Native voting rights. Voting rights, and most especially, are going to be really key now and then into the future. So some of those longer term investments that we're doing now, nearly about $1 million worth of just supporting 3 key organizations: the Native Organizers Alliance, Advanced Native Political Leadership, and then the Native American Voting Rights Coalition. Those particular organizations are really important in terms of protecting Native voting rights, especially amidst this pandemic. So being able to be immersed in that work is just amazing to me, because I know from my own personal history as an Indigenous person how important it is that our rights are protected and ensured. And part of the other piece of this, in terms of challenges, not only internet connections, but also I think part of it too is just, it feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's needed across the continent and across the world as Rob shared earlier, what we're able to do in terms of philanthropy and investments is minimal compared to, the resources available in the public sector. But also just knowing that there's so many families and communities that really need our help and support. And so in many ways, that's one of the challenges, is just continuing to feel like we're just scratching the surface. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So the next question that I have is for Rob. So one of Kellogg's Battle Creek initiatives is BC Vision, which is committed to creating a thriving community where there's equitable opportunity for residents. And a couple of action items are to promote college and career readiness for students in Battle Creek and provide equitable workforce opportunities. Seeing that these are both important avenues for socioeconomic mobility and success, what are some specific initiatives or programs that have been implemented for these purposes?
That is a great question, and BC Vision is one of the programs we're very proud about spearheading. And again, that's in Battle Creek, Michigan, and we have similar sort of projects all throughout all of our places. We are looking at not only national systems, but also what can we do in the local communities, working with those communities. But to answer the question about how are we thinking about workforce and education, in particular, and there was a question in the chat box about like the capitalist system that we live in and that we work in, and that the kind of our global economy. How do we make improvements to that? How do we actually make sure that people have a living wage, that they can work and be able to save and to bring money back home? So that is something that we're very focused on. Family members get sick and they shouldn't have to lose their job or make very difficult decisions between putting food on the table or trying to make sure someone has a decent education. So we're looking at not only leave structures, but we're looking at the opportunity for healthcare wrapped into that. Also quality childcare. People who have to go to work, they want to make sure their kids are in good places, whether that's schools or childcare, and making sure that that all folks have access to that and that there are resources available. You shouldn't just, because you make a lot of money and you can afford a good daycare, that shouldn't mean the difference between a quality education for one child over another. So we feel like that's very important. And also just on infrastructure, I think if you think back to your schools that you went to, they're not all the same around the country. And some schools are in great condition. They have technology, they have all the modern, the modern ways of learning and engaging a global economy, and others just don't have anything. And so there has to be some way to improve the infrastructure and the technology, especially now in COVID moment, as Ryan described, where there aren't the ability to connect with students when they can't gather together. And technology is a real gap for most of the world, and so many places in this country, rural and urban both. So those are a couple of things that I think that we are looking at, and that we're hoping that we can learn from places like BC Vision about what actually can make a difference in a community. And then how do we think about that as far as a national model and expand that out? And that's one of the great things about philanthropy, that we can work with partners to make that a reality. So it was a great question, and thank you for asking that.
Thank you for sharing. So Rick Axtell from Centre College would love to hear Vicky's reaction to the recent Supreme Court decision affirming Creek and other tribal groups' sovereignty over much of eastern Oklahoma for the purposes of criminal justice enforcement. What are the implications for other tribal groups, especially given the fact that so many treaties have been violated by the US government?
I love that question. Are you still able to hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. So I think with the recent Supreme Court decision, I think, again, it's in many ways reassuring that the U.S. Supreme Court, again, I think in many ways just ensured the codification of tribal sovereignty, ensuring that our rights as tribal nations are protected, the fact that there's a legal precedent set, again, in terms of, one, a treaty with a tribal nation being honored and recognized as the law of the land. Two, also ensuring that treaty rights and tribal governance in our systems and our constitutions are being protected as they were guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution, and for Oklahoma tribes, and ensuring that their their tribal governments are able to function and survive and thrive in a place in Oklahoma where things are not always so friendly towards Native people nor to Native nations. The other piece of this is just thinking about the ability of tribes to be able to enforce and enact their own tribal laws to protect citizens, to protect their families, to protect communities, and more specifically, the protection of Indigenous women, to ensuring that our rights are in place and secured. And I think, you know, just the recognition again of just the land that belongs to tribal people, knowing that the U.S. Supreme Court, you know, is very clear about the decision that was made. For me, in many ways, it's reassuring that even with the onslaught of the racialized violence, the systemic racism that continues to exist, you know, it feels like, in a sense, a significant victory that's come forward in the past month in terms of ensuring the protection of tribal sovereignty. It also speaks to the connection to movement across the country in terms of ensuring the rights of people of color. You know, I think in many ways this is also connected to Black Lives Matter, where with this movement and with the partnerships and the cross-racial collaboration, that too, all those efforts, everything is connected. And I think that this movement now also has played a significant role of tribes also being able to protect their sovereignty and ensuring that our rights are secure and in place now and into the future.
Thank you for your insight. So Stephanie Rolfe from Millsaps College in SHECP would love to know how Kellogg prepares their teams for the best practices they hold at the center of their work.
I can start with that, and I think I would love my other team members to join in that. But just in terms of how we are very much, we believe in a strong culture of collaboration and cooperation. So right from the very beginning, from day one, there is a strong process to really get you engaged with our value system and make sure that there's open dialogue, that we're all comfortable with, you know, kind of what our approach is going to be. And we really take that to heart. And that's one thing that I really have loved about Kellogg, is that it walks the walk. You know, it really does take, as Ryan and Vicky have both mentioned, that racial equity is at our center. And it's something that we deeply embrace. And we're on this journey together. We all may be in different places, but it's something where we are working towards that common goal. And it's about how do we improve the lives of kids. And so for me personally, it has been just a spectacular place to work, and certainly a great learning opportunity for me, and also to learn the experiences of others on my team. It only makes the work that we do stronger. I don't know, Ryan or Vicky, if you'll have thoughts as well.
And I would say, because I didn't have the opportunity to answer the first question, which is, what's the best part of the job? And I think on a personal note, it's such a privilege to sort of be part of an organization that favors the learning aspect of it. So yes, I was born and raised in Haiti, but it's not until I actually came to the US that I was sort of aware and I could fully understand the legacy of colonialism, the history behind the social science that's behind all these discrepancies. It could actually explain all the suffering that I've witnessed, you know, unnecessarily suffering, to be honest, that I've witnessed. So I think that privilege of the job of actually now being at the table and putting people at the table, the people that really matter, people from the community, and on a personal note, sort of continue learning from people like Vicky about Indian country, and people like Robb, where you know, how our grant making actually has an impact, an end goal of actually developing into a policy decision in the case that the Kellogg Foundation will no longer be in a community. So I think that's powerful.
Thank you. So this next question comes from Nina Brown from Center College. She thinks it's great that the foundation's leadership, specifically Ryan and Vicky, are from the communities that they are working to support. And she's curious to know if the foundation actively sought out qualified candidates from these communities or if they found the jobs themselves. Is the same true in other communities that the Kellogg Foundation empowers?
Would you like to start, Ryan?
Hey, Ryan, I think you're muted.
Abigail, I'm sorry, I kind of missed the question. Could you go ahead? Could you start, just repeat the question?
So she's curious to know if the foundation actively sought out qualified candidates from these communities or if they found the jobs themselves. And is the same true in other communities that the Kellogg Foundation empowers?
I can't speak for the HR process of the Kellogg Foundation, but what I can say is, and what we touched briefed on, both myself, Robb, and Vicky, we're very proud of our DNA, and part of that DNA is the community engagement aspect of it, but also is the leadership aspect of it. And we invest heavily in leadership programs within the community where some of our partners and grantees actually end up in positions of leadership. And if they want to take the next step and apply for an open position, then I'm pretty sure they would be looked favored because of their working community, because of their active engagement. So yes, I was part of the community, but I was also part of the grantee, a former grantee of Kellogg as well. And I think maybe that might have played an advantage. Frankly, I would have probably found an organization that also works in Haiti because I'm committed. And I think that if you're looking for a position, I think commitment to what you want to do in the place where you want to work is probably more important than any of that.
Thank you. I think there's time for one more question. Andy Purdy asked, is there a survey or assessment or instrument that can be used to conduct a gap or needs assessment for communities as to capabilities and requirements they have or are missing that are needed to give children a chance at success?
Vicky, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Can you repeat the first part of that question?
Is there a survey, assessment, or instrument that can be used to conduct a gap or needs assessment for communities as to capabilities and requirements they have or are missing that are needed to give children a chance of success?
Absolutely. So we do have available resources through the foundation that actually address a number of different tools or resources that are able to address looking at the gaps and also like needs analysis for communities and kind of more specifically in terms of children and families. So there are a number of different resources that we have available that we can share. And also we invest quite strategically in some of those investments in communities themselves. Some of the partners, for example, one of the investments we just recently did was through the Standing Rock Sioux Nation in North Dakota, where we just made an investment into the tribal nation for them to actually develop their own community needs analysis and a community visioning process. So that in particular is very instrumental, something that they will be developing during the next year and a half for them to be able to really, in many ways, develop their own indigenous-based needs analysis and have it based in an indigenous evaluation and research and learning framework. So this is one example of an investment that we've recently made in terms of a resource and a tool. So not only at the foundation do we have organization-wide resources in terms of those kinds of resources, those tools, but we also make those investments directly into communities and partner organizations that we work very closely with that are really trying to build out their own sort of infrastructure for those kinds of tools and resources.
And if I may, Abigail, I just want to emphasize the importance of a community visioning process in local development, whether it's Indian country, where it's a social project in Haiti, for example, where lessons learned of the earthquake have been that, you know, so many partners have just rushed in and helicoptered in without any prior knowledge or respect for cultural norms, for communities, their needs, and kind of act as the experts. Whereas our community visioning processes is a participative approach where the community actually says and we amplify their voices through our work. I think that's the key difference here in those two approaches.
Thank you. So actually we do have time for one more. Rick Axtell posted this question specifically for Rob. I've always been impressed with the work of the Kellogg Foundation, including efforts to get at root causes of long-term systemic inequalities, inequities, going beyond Band-Aid approaches. I'm curious about how the foundation has dealt with the uncomfortable fact of the overt racism of the Kellogg brothers, who were staunch supporters of segregation and even eugenics. Many of our colleges are having to deal with these issues in our history, such as founders who were slaveholders, buildings named after them, etc. And many are doing a poor job of transparently and tangibly addressing our ugly historical realities. Although such values obviously don't characterize the foundation itself, how has the foundation dealt with this history?
That's a really good question and a hard question. I think but very important. I think that what happens not only with the Kellogg Foundation, but with, like you said, many universities and many other institutions, we benefit from, I'd say white Americans benefit from a very racist structure and in the white supremacy that took place. And it's really incumbent on all of us to take a stand, to say, to uncover, to have a real honest conversation about it, and then also figure out how do we heal from that, how do we repair from that, and how do we move forward from that in a way that's equitable and takes into account our past, but then thinking, how do we move forward, and what sort of policies and what sort of ways do we want to move forward. So it's a journey for sure. And certainly the Kellogg Foundation has gone through that journey and continues to go through that journey. It's not a destination that ends in one place, but continues over time. And it's something that the foundation really has set its sight on, is living, in my view, has really been living its talk, and really been very focused on that journey. And we're, I guess we're doing things from hiring practices to norms of the way that we operate as staffs, to the sort of grant making we do and the sort of accountability that we put on ourselves to make sure that the grant making is, as Ryan was describing, reflective of the communities, as Vicky also mentioned. But that's at least how I have seen it, and it's an ongoing process. And I think this is also a very important moment for more organizations to be making that sort of a stand as well. And Vicky is part of our equity team, and I mean, I don't know if Vicky, if you would add to that, or what your thoughts would be on that.
Thank you, Rob. And, I think you've done a beautiful job of really summarizing some really important points. And I think just to add to that, one of the things that, in terms of our healing work, and because I'm on our DNA team, which is our racial equity, community engagement and leadership team, and so part of that history and what we talk about in terms of healing work, or more specifically racial healing, is really telling the truth about our history, and uncovering it and unpacking it. And, the Kellogg Foundation is one of many foundations throughout philanthropy that, every single institution or entity in philanthropy is a part of a larger system, a larger ecosystem. Not just philanthropy, but in economies and legal structures and multiple systems across this country. So being a part of that is recognizing where we are in that larger ecosystem and what role we play as a foundation. One of the things that I want to share is that with that history, especially the early days of the foundation, where while, you know, that history of the Kellogg family, the history of eugenics conversation and what took place, one of the things that I literally had a chance to go back to the early writings of Will Keith Kellogg himself, specifically reading through his letters, looking at his thoughts and visions about community engagement and what he hoped for. One of the things that I appreciated about his early writings and his considerations about families and children was really just this care for ensuring that all children would have equal opportunity to health, to education, to well-being. What helped him open up his understanding of the world was when he started to travel internationally and started to make some of those early investments into international work. That is where his capacity and understanding as a human being changed over time, and it expanded, and he was able to grow as a human being, being able to experience life outside of the United States. So that's one of the things that I've appreciated, being able to step back into that history and recognizing it and uncovering it for what it is. And, you know, that in many ways is something that has to happen across philanthropy. It has to happen across our institutions. And we see that happening in many places. And, you know, thinking back to our organization, like in around 2007, there was a commitment made to be an anti-racist organization. Our board at that time, as well as the leadership in the organization, made that decision and that commitment, recognizing, especially at the time, that there was a lot of work that needed to happen in our own organization in terms of, you know, how we see ourselves, how we partner with communities, how we partner with different organizations and families and children across the world in many ways, and build on a legacy that's sound and that is really focused on building out communities and supporting families and children. And I'm incredibly honored to be able to have stepped into this work at the foundation around 2016 when I joined the organization. And I joined because of its commitment to racial equity and racial healing. Being an Indigenous person, I know stepping into philanthropy that, you know, I recognize the system as it exists. And in many ways, because of the organization's commitment to racial equity, to racial justice, you know, we continue to be on this journey of creating that change. So many of us do the best that we can to step forward in a good way and to be supportive and do the best that we can to continue working on creating change. Are we perfect at what we do? No, we're not. But I think that one of the beautiful things about being able to partner with people like Robb and Ryan, and I believe Donna, who joined the call as well, is just knowing that we have colleagues like that who are fully committed and dedicated. We all come from different walks of life, different ways of being. We bring different forms of knowledge and wisdom. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about what we're able to do and our contributions. And just, you know, I'm amazed by so many wonderful people inside the organization who are doing their utmost to serve communities and the partners that we work so closely with.
Thank you. Thank you all for your thorough insights. I'm now going to turn it over to Nina to close us out.
Thank you, Abigail, and thank you all for joining SHECP tonight for our third keynote of the summer. My name is Nina Brown, and I'm a rising senior from Centre College, where I'm an anthropology sociology major minoring in social justice. This summer, I'm working with Park Place Outreach in Savannah, Georgia, They are a nonprofit organization that works to support runaway and homeless youth, as well as their families in the Savannah region. And as I've been spending my summer learning about the niche needs of Savannah youth in tandem with their own personal goals and their strengths within their community, it's been so wonderful to hear from an organization like the Kellogg Foundation, which is so focused on identifying and working to end systemic causes of poverty from a community perspective. The Foundation's approach to this work, which centers the experiences of children and their families, is so vital to move towards genuine change. A special thanks to Robb Gray, Vicky, Stott, and Ryan Jiha for taking the time to provide these important insights about poverty response through the Kellogg Foundation in both tribal nations and in Haiti. Our final keynote will take place during the Free Off Closing Conference on Friday, July 31st. Dr. Scott W. Allard, Professor of Policy and Governance in the Evans Center of Policy and Governance at the University of Washington, will provide the final address, reflecting on our community read this summer, Places in Need, the Changing Geography of Poverty. We look forward to seeing you then, and have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. I hope you have a nice night.